Hey everyone, so today we're going to be looking at the 350QX here and a gimbal for it. Got the instruction manual for the gimbal, which is kind of hard to understand at first, but it shouldn't be too hard to put together. The gimbal is basically an Asian China company that sent it over from China, about $100, but I've seen these exact ones in action and they seem to work pretty good. One thing that I've heard about these is that you got to be careful. It's a good idea to Loctite all the screws and bolts on them. I'm going to bring this up by the camera, and you'll be able to see here this is very loose. There's a couple screws here and they're not tight. That's obviously no good, so that just needs to be tightened. But I've heard some people say that they've had problems with this falling apart, so it's a good idea to undo and redo any screws that are on the parts that you don't want to have problems with. So I'm going to go ahead and do that before I put it on. But basically the gimbal comes like this. Here's your power cord to gain power to it, but you also have the opposite side, which has little solder points, so you can solder this in to feed power to it. Then you have the only other cord you need, which is the control cord. It's going to make everything work. So it's fairly simple plug and play. You got to get your power adapter in there. And then these cords, I'll show how to set them up. There's basically a little circuit area in here, which I'll bring a camera up to and show you when I'm actually doing it. And basically you just plug them in and plug them into the circuit board on the gimbal. I'm probably going to use this, but I've been thinking I have small 500 milliamp 3-cell batteries that are really small, and I could probably fit that in there with a 2200 milliamp 3-cell for the actual helicopter. So that way the gimbal could run off its own battery. I won't have to solder, and by running off its own battery, 500 milliamp should be fine. It should last the whole flight, no problem. And then the helicopter will be able to fly a little longer because it won't be draining any battery to the gimbal. So I'm deciding if I want to solder that connector in or use a small 500 milliamp battery. I'll have to see if they fit, and I'll go ahead and show you guys that when I get to that step. Another thing is, this gimbal, when put on the bottom here, is too tall, as you can see. So if you want to use this gimbal, or pretty much any gimbal on the 350, you need to get blades upgraded, longer landing gear here. And it's made by Blade. You can get them online. I bought everything on Amazon, all this stuff. And you can get the blades on the landing gear online for, I think they were $14.99. And basically, they're just much longer landing gear. So this way you're going to have plenty of space to have the gimbal under there. And it's made out of the same material, real simple to switch those out, just a couple screws. They come with new screws, one screw for each attaching to the body, and then you also have to change this little sensor that's in one side of the landing gear. Real simple. There's sensor points in the new landing gear, and it's just two tiny little screws to undo and then re-put it. Real simple. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and change the landing gear, and then I'm going to mount this to the bottom of the 350QX, and then once we're at that point, I'll start showing you guys the installation of it in terms of the wires. Then we'll take it outside and see how it works. I'm going to go ahead also and Loctite these bolts together so we don't have any problems there. So we'll be back when I'm working on the landing gear, and we'll show you guys how that all works out. Alright, so the first part of the landing gear is simple. This side just take out, put back in the new one, and I'm going to reuse the same screws because they're the exact same thing. And just like that, this side is done. Once I get it fully tightened in there. There we go. And now this side, bring my light over here. As you can see, we have the sensor here. So hopefully the screwdriver is small enough. It's really kind of tiny screws here. Alright, so I stripped that, but as you can see, it's very flimsy. Just broke it off. So on my next one, here's the sensor. Go ahead and pull this through. Now, pull this off. Hopefully I can fit this through here. This could be a problem because we're supposed to, oh, I'll just unplug it. Carefully without breaking the actual sensor. There we go. Alright, slip the sensor through. Put my new landing gear. Slip the sensor through. Pull it up. Put that down in there. And then we'll attach the landing gear here. Seems like it's probably stripped now. These are pretty small, weak screws. So what I'm going to have to go ahead and do now is it's in the right position. So I just got to keep it right in the right position here. And I'm just going to epoxy that in. So it'll be, you know, permanent. If I ever have to replace that sensor, I might have to buy a new one. I'll see how little epoxy I can use. So that's the new landing gear on though. I'll just go ahead and epoxy this and let it sit. And then we'll continue to the gimbal. Alright, so I encountered a problem. The attachment plate here, I stripped the screw under the here that's in the plastic, and it wouldn't hold in. I only had one screw because it only comes with 2 attachments rather than 4 like the stock one. So I stripped one, I only had that one left, so I held that one in tight, and then this is epoxy. I have epoxy over and under, and it's going to hold that strong onto the body. So it's kind of a permanent solution, but you know, this body for this helicopter is pretty cheap. If I ever wanted to get a new body, would be real simple. So that's kind of going to be permanent on there. And then my sensor up here, like I told you guys, I stripped it. So as you can see, there's some epoxy holding that in all over. And this is 30-minute epoxy. It's the lowest I could find. Usually I would, for something small like this, I would use like 5-minute epoxy. But it's 30-minute epoxy, so I got a little while to wait now and let that fully harden in both places. Then I'll come back and continue working. Alright guys, it's all installed on the quadcopter now. Let me go ahead and just give you a little test. I plugged in a battery. It's going to take a couple seconds for this to initialize. And once it all initializes here, it takes about 5 seconds. There we go. Now let's check it out on the helicopter. That is pretty cool. So now, let's go ahead outside, get a flight in, and see how everything works and looks while this is on there. I really like how far forward it is. Nothing should be in the way. It might catch a little bit of the propellers. I'm not sure. We'll just have to see about that. But the landing gear and everything's out of the way. So we really shouldn't get anything on flight other than video in front of us. So we'll just see how that looks when we fly it. And overall, that really holds steady. Pretty darn neat. So let's go test it. Alright guys, one last thing before we go outside and fly. I want to show you how I set this up. So my stock battery for the actual quadcopter is going to go in the normal space, 18 to 2200 milliamp. And then on the bottom here is where I'm going to put my gimbal battery. And it's just simple Velcro. This is an 800. I'm going to be using a 500 milliamp, which I have charging right now. But simply I'm going to stick it on here, and that's where it's going to be. Now if it happens to fall off, which I don't think it will, basically it'll just unplug the gimbal, the battery might fall to the ground. But my quadcopter itself will keep flying because its battery is separate. Now I've flown lots of 3D planes with batteries like this, and I've never had a problem with them falling off with just Velcro. So I think this will be just fine, and the battery I'm going to use is actually a little bit smaller. It's 500 instead of 800. So this makes it all a nice and easy unit here. We discussed that it came with these cords, and what I believe these are for is you can set up your gimbal to have different pitch. Like instead of being straight forward like it is stock, you could set it up to maybe aim a little down or aim a little right or left and such. There's also a mini USB port here where you can plug it into your computer and also do some settings. But I find the stock setting, just straightforward, should be good for me to begin and test out. And if I ever want to do extra settings, I can go ahead and figure that out. The manual that came with it is pretty tricky to understand, but there's lots of good information online about it. So I'm going to go ahead and let my battery finish up, and then we'll take this out and get it flying. Alright guys, here we are outside. I'm shaking around the heli. It's a little windy out here, but it's not too bad. And we're going to just take this up, do a little flight. So let's go ahead and see how it works. Alright, so there was our first test. Let's go ahead and upload the video and see what it looks like. Alright, so we just had our first flight with the 350QX and the Hobbypower brushless gimbal here. Pretty darn neat. You just saw the flight video. I think it works great. For the price that it is at only $100, pretty darn competitive, because there are gimbals that can be a lot more. I mean, you can go into multiple hundreds for a gimbal. So for $100, this thing works pretty good. I'll have to see how long it lasts and, you know, test it out more and more. But for the price and for how good it works stock without any settings or anything, I think it's definitely a buy. I'd say definitely check it out if you want something inexpensive that's going to make your 350QX video a lot better. Like I said, there's more expensive ones out there, but very simple to install, very easy, and pretty darn cool. So check it out. We'll have more videos of this flying in the near future. Happy flying, everyone.